I'm Tina Knoll, founder of Larj Media and producer of Nobody Should Believe Me.
I'm Andrea Dunlop, host and executive producer of Nobody Should Believe Me.
I'm Corinne Kiltow, producer and editor at Larj Media, and I'm moderating this episode today. How did the idea of making this a podcast come about?
Since my novel, We Came Here to Forget, came out in 2019, I had been speaking more publicly about the issue of Munchausen by proxy and talking about my sort of personal connection to it. And as a part of that work, I got in touch with this amazing group of people that is the Munchausen by Proxy Committee that's part of APSAC, which is the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children, which is a big umbrella organization, all interdisciplinary, folks that work with kids. Just hearing all of these stories about other cases and really understanding that this was a much bigger issue than just something that sort of affected a few families in this really isolated fashion, which I think is what everyone feels like when they're going through it. And then also just was struck by how compelling these stories are.
And you were sitting there thinking, I'm exactly where I need to be right now.
I've been estranged from my sister for a really long time. These investigations, the sort of specter of this has hung really heavily over me. And there have been long periods of time where I just didn't want anything to do with the issue. And then when I wrote my novel, which tackles the issue of Munchausen by proxy, I thought, okay, I'm done with it. Like, that's it. I've written my thing and I'm done with it. And then, the book came out and then I was doing some press and I said, okay, I'll talk about it in this context because I want to raise awareness about the issue and I want people to know that, this is like, if someone is reading, that they're not the only person to ever go through it and that kind of thing. And then I said, and then I'm done, and then, so I sort of like, it was a big step in sort of getting drawn a little bit more into doing this, into having this be a bigger part of my professional life. And I think I was feeling like, am I just a glutton for punishment to sort of be focusing on this really, sad chapter of losing my relationship with my sister over the investigation. And so I was feeling very mixed feelings about being there. And then it was such a positive experience and meeting these professionals. A lot of people that work on this as a big part of their lives really do so at great personal expense. Mm-hmm. It's not something where there's a lot of funding. It's not something where there's necessarily a lot of institutional support. People really take a lot of flack for being involved in these cases. And so I think it was very inspiring to see this group of people. And I just thought, I think I'm supposed to be here. It feels like I'm supposed to be here.
So why specifically a podcast?
I was working with Tina Knoll on this other project with my dad, and which is sort of a memoir podcast about his life. And I was just really sort of falling in love with the audio medium and was learning so much from Tina and just thought that she would be the right partner for this kind of project because it certainly is a huge challenge to figure out how to talk about this issue in a way that is compelling, but also responsible. And I knew that Tina was up to the task. So then I brought it to her.
And when you talked to Tina at Larj Media, and Tina, you were instantly thinking, yes, this is a great topic for a podcast, but not only just because of Detective Mike Weber and his investigation, but Andrea's close relationship to it, which I understand at first, Andrea did not want to talk about it. Yeah. But Tina, you thought, you know what? No, we need to tie this in somehow.
When you think about what moves people, it's story, and it's a personal connection to a story. And so many podcasts are focused on the topic. And there's a wise tendency, I think, to handle it academically. To say, and Andrea clearly had all of these great experts at her fingertips and had deep knowledge of this topic. And so I felt like an audience is really going to connect to this if they really understand why she is compelled to do it. And, Andrea is a novelist. She is a great storyteller. And still, she was reluctant to bring her entire family into this podcast, understandably so. And so I think we together, not for nothing, we handled it gently and came together in knowing that for an audience to really understand why this person is on this quest to really understand, what is this? Is it a disease? Is it a crime? Is it, what is this thing that my sister was really investigated for? How do I learn about it? How am I going to unpack this thing? I felt like from an audience perspective, they had to understand that heart connection that she has with her sister. I saw it. I mean, we had lots of tears together about how hard that was for her family to go through, and I had met her father. So I've come to really care about them. And our editor, Lisa Gray, was also like, wow, I wonder if we can weave in that story. And there was a lot of, we were trying to figure out how to put that together was hard. Like, how do we weave that story? And Andrea was like, there's this amazing case that is very tragic, but also ends in a positive light with the Hope Ybarra case, that her kids are saved, that there's some parallels here that I think that we could tie together. And so that is when I think the podcast began to, the light started to shine for both of us. And then Andrea's like, we could go to Texas and talk to these people. And that also was like, okay, well, we've got a story. She's got a deep-hearted story. She was opening her mind and story and life up privately together. We were just talking so much. So I think it really kind of came together on that.
And chemistry between the two of you, right? I mean, that's a lot of trust for you, Andrea, to trust in what Tina is trying to guide you into for the podcast. And then, of course, you travel Texas, Idaho, parts of Washington. So road tripping. Tell me about the snacks. I know the first thing I think about is you share Cheetos, or what kind of things would you guys share, Andrea?
No, I don't share Tina's snacks because Tina is well known for eating
eat weird things.
The weirdest snacks. And so I feel like, we'll be walking along in Texas and she's like, okay, just try this vegan beef jerky. I swear to God, it's good. And listener, it's so disgusting. Like, I think that Vegemite is the only thing I've tasted that's more disgusting. But yeah, so she'll just be like over there with her kelp snacks. We both do enjoy a Starbucks Impossible breakfast sandwich. That is where our crossover.
Many trips to Starbucks.
But yeah, it's very funny going on the road with Tina to Texas in particular because, people they like their meat in Fort Worth, Texas. And so I've watched her eat some sad potatoes at some barbecue joints.
Very nice.
Yeah, but
we travel together.
We really had a great time traveling together. It was not, those were like emotionally exhausting.
Yes, days. Andrea had to sit and hear these stories. We both had to sit and hear these stories, but she had to be like so present in doing these interviews and recording for hours during the day. And at the end of the day, we had to come together and like pal around,
Yeah.
like, oh gosh, we just, had this common experience. Plus, I genuinely like you, obviously.
Yes, me too.
We have a great relationship. But yeah, it was arduous, long recording days, and sifting through these stories was a lot. Heavy, man. It was heavy.
I, going into this, had no experience as an interviewer. So I really I think Tina really helped me build my confidence on the fly. And I, really...
That's such a together thing, I will say, though. Like, that is totally, like, you can give direction, somebody can take it. But, like, there's plenty of people that can't take the direction the way that you can and absorb it and, like, quick study. And so together, you used this term a long time ago, we really mind melded on things.
Yeah.
Where I could start to hear how she might ask a question, or I could understand what she was getting at, So we really got this really, like,
a great team.
All to say, it wasn't just like me coaching you into being a good interview. Like, together we did that, I feel.
Yeah. Well, and I think you also taught me about, like, when to sort of let something land and let something breathe. I think I do have, because I am a talker, I do have sometimes that tendency to, especially when someone's talking about something really hard, like I'll jump in there and like, oh, this is what you mean, or like trying to like help someone along, and like that's like the worst thing you can do when you're interviewing someone for an audio medium. Yeah, I think those trips were really incredible, and I just remember really specifically, I think it was after we interviewed George Honeycutt, which was one of our last interviews in Texas, and I just remember being in the lobby of the hotel and just looking at Tina and being like, oh, no, this is not just like a hobby project. Like, we really have something here. And I was just also really blown away by how willing people were to talk to me. When heading into it, I was like, I didn't have necessarily, I had connections with the experts, right? So I knew Mark and Mary and, Mike Weber would talk to us, and that we could get to some of these other sort of expert professional people who are, to be frank, desperate for people to understand this issue better. Mm-hmm. But in terms of, Hope's family and her ex-husband and some of these other people, I had no idea whether or not they'd want to talk to me, or if they'd just be like, who is this person?
Or how they would be. There's also like there's, this sort of magical thing that can happen when you're in an interview where you're holding space for it. And I think that we did that. Like, we kept holding the space to let them talk. But I will also say these people, I don't know if it was luck or what, but the Putcher family, they are great people. And you don't know going into it how they're going to be, what their personality is going to be like. These were wonderful humans with open hearts and kindness, and they're funny and they're interesting folks, And it's a hard subject, very hard subject for them.
And the fact that they were willing to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you gave them a voice.
We all cried together on every one of those family members we cried with.
Yeah. And it really, it meant a lot to me that those people were willing to trust me because, the coverage of these cases can go so bad. And I just think I really wanted to do right by everyone that we talked to, and we were really, really deliberate on what questions we asked and sort of what we included and what we left out. And it was really an incredible experience, especially I think that first trip, just because everyone who's been through an investigation or been through, a situation in their family where there were suspicions or where there was a charge or any sort of thing on the spectrum really feels like they're the only person that ever went through it ever in their life. And it wasn't until I sat down with a Robin Putcher I had ever spoken to someone who'd had a personal experience of having a family member investigated. And that was extremely powerful. And honestly, that interview, when I left that interview, I was pretty overwhelmed. And I just thought, I remember kind of driving home from Tina's house and just thinking, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can sit through hours and hours and hours of this. And then I woke up the next day and I felt really good. And I thought, no, this feels like what I'm supposed to do. And it's hard to talk about these things, but it's also, I think these conversations were very cathartic. They were cathartic for me. I think in most cases, at least this is what it seemed like, and this was the feedback we had, it was cathartic for whoever we were talking to.
Yeah.
And we've kept in touch with everybody from the podcast for the most part.
Wow.
And that's become its own sort of little community. One of the things that I really is a deep value of mine, because, I come into this not as a podcaster, but already as a storyteller because I'm an author. That's my main gig. I really believe in the power of stories to make people feel less alone. And I think that that's one of the best things that you can ever do as a storyteller, whether you're doing it through fiction or through nonfiction. And I think that was what we were seeing. And we were sort of seeing that relief that comes with, oh my gosh, I'm telling you this experience and I don't have to explain it to you.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying. And you're not I think what everyone had been through is these stories are so shocking that what people are used to is being met with a certain amount of disbelief and, wrong-headed questions. And even if they're well-meant, of just what happened? And that sort of you watch the blood drain from someone's face. And then that isn't a very healing experience for the person who's trying to tell that story that happened to them if just you're then dealing with the listener's shock, right? And so I think what we could do also was sort of no one here is going to be shocked. And we're presenting this as part of a pattern, and we're presenting this as not just the, oh my God, how many surgeries and that kind of.
And so you developed some great relationships with the Putchers. At what point did you realize you were actually going to get to talk to Hope? And what did that feel like?
Oh my God.
That was quite a roller coaster ride.
I mean, that was many months of back and forth.
You're always, as a producer, trying to figure out how you're going to end it. How are you going to end this thing? Where are we going on this journey, right? So if we didn't interview Hope, there was this one path I'm thinking. And if we get Hope, there's this other path that I'm thinking. And the whole time you're well, all these episodes are starting to come together. Yeah. The story's starting to come together. We're having to take all the tape from Texas that we were recording and start to process that tape and start to build story around what's going on. And here Andrea is diligently working to land an interview with Hope.
That was really fascinating. And that was definitely the hardest part of season one, by a long, long shot, right? Because, by and large, everyone that we reached out to said yes. And then a couple people like never got back to us. And so we were like, all right, well, that person doesn't want to talk, and that's fine. And with Hope, you know, I had gotten her number from one of her family members and reached out to her, you know, right in the beginning. And she was nice enough about it and sort of said no. And then I kind of let it be and I think there was some part of me when she said no that I was relieved, because I was like, this is very fraught. Like, I don't know. Yeah. And I just sort of thought, like, also, you know, I think part of it was when I started, I didn't have as much confidence as an interviewer. So I was like, what if I just get manipulated by this person and they get to say all the things they want to say? And I just think I was also like, you know, have reason to be fearful of Hope. She has done some very extreme things. So it's not, you know, like, I don't want to sort of overplay that, but like, you know,
well, Detective Mike Weber told us don't be in a room alone with her.
Don't be alone with her.
Wow. Let's be honest.
Yeah, he said, and I sort of laughed that off because, you know, here she is, this sort of diminutive looking person, but he's like, no, I'm serious. Don't be in the room alone with her. You know, I let it go at first, and then the further we got into recording, and that was, you know, when we first reached out to her, that was when I was first reaching out to everybody. So I'd first reached out to, you know, Fabian, and I hadn't done many of these interviews yet when I first reached out to Hope, and she said no. And I was kind of like, fine, whatever. Like, I don't know how that was going to go. So it's fine. We'll say we reached out to you. You didn't want to talk. So fine. And then the more that, like, I so got into talking and having these really deep conversations with her siblings and her dad and her ex-husband, I just thought, we're making this whole I mean, obviously the whole podcast is not about Hope. We take a lot of sort of other tracks in the podcast, but she is a huge part of the podcast. And I sort of felt really uncomfortable of, like, I'm making this podcast about someone and their voice isn't included, and I would feel like the project had sort of a greater level of integrity if we could include them. And also just that I thought Hope was going to be more open than anybody else we could find to give us that perspective. And I think because my number one goal with this podcast was really to put a human face on all of this. And I think it's very easy for us with people who have committed particularly shocking, heinous crimes. It's very easy for us to just make them a monster, lock them away, throw away the key. Let's just completely dehumanize this person, right? They're a criminal. They're a monster. They're, you know, not a person that I would recognize. And that's just not true. And I knew that wasn't true. And especially because we were fleshing out this person that Hope had been in her life before she committed these crimes, where she was this really beloved family member and, you know, person in her community, and she was smart and she was all these things, right? And I wanted people to understand that Hope was a person too, and the best way to do that would be to get her voice in there. And I also thought, like, you know, she had done some interviews, so I thought, you know, there was a chance she would probably be open to it if I was persistent. And also, I really felt like I wanted to convince her. I was like, I think you should talk to me. I was like, I think that I'm going to ask you questions that other interviewers are not. You know, the other interviews with her, the one Deanna Boyd from Fort Worth Star-Telegram did with her was excellent. Deanna is an excellent reporter, but she's not coming from it at the same perspective that I did. And I was like, I'm not going to ask you about your crime. Like, because trying to get an honest depiction out of Hope of, like, what she did would be a fool's errand, right? We know she's not going to tell. She's never been fully accountable for her crimes. And I knew that. You know, I knew she said she didn't remember. She had a diabetic coma, et cetera. So I knew that it wasn't going to be as though she was going to, like, walk us through from A to B. Here's why I did what I did. And, you know, and that wasn't even really what I wanted to know. I really wanted to get a sense of, like, how she experienced the whole thing and what she thought now and how she felt looking back on it, and just to get, like, a sense of her as a person. And I think that maybe I was a little hopeful that she would be open to treatment. I made that offer to her when we were talking. I said, listen, like, I'm, you know, no brag, but, like, I know all the best people in the world on this topic. I mean, that's really true. Like, that's because I'm on this committee. And, you know, if you want help, like, if you are a person that is open to treatment for this, then, like, I will help you do that. I will make those connections. I will talk to you. I will, you know. And she said at the time she was open to it. I haven't heard from her since. So who knows? Offer still stands. You know, not that the Butchers asked me to do this or that they need me to do this or that I have any place to do this, but like if there's anything about that conversation that could help them close the loop, or if there's anything about that conversation that could be illuminating for her children, if they ever want to listen, and certainly like there's, you know, they may not, but like I sort of just thought like if there's any insight that I can get out of her, like I really want to. So I just kind of persisted, and I reached back out to her and I said, you know, I know you said no, but you know, here's all the reasons I think you should talk to me. I'm really like, my intentions are good here. Like, I'm not trying to like make you look bad. And I, you know, want to, like, I really, I think this conversation could be good for you too. Like, I you know, and so we got in this back and forth where she said yes, and then she said no, and then she said she was going to talk to her lawyer, and then I don't think that there was necessarily a lawyer.
I just want to interject because this was over days and weeks of this.
Yeah, this was a long.
So this wasn't like a
months. This was months and back and forth.
Yeah,
no, this was months and back and forth.
Long back and forth.
It was July of 2021, and so we had done. It was like the last interview that we were trying to get, and she said yes, and we booked our trip, and we got plane tickets, and we got a hotel, and then she said no. And said, I've reconsidered. And she kept saying, you know, oh, I don't want to hurt my family. And I told her, I said, like, I don't think this is going to hurt your family. Like, I have been talking to your family a lot. They're wonderful. Like, I don't think that anything that you say now is going to.
Was she surprised that you were talking to her family?
I don't know. Probably, honestly. I mean, and I think that probably also maybe was a factor. I don't know. It's very hard to guess what is going on truly in Hope's mind. But, you know, I told her, like, I don't think, you know, and I said, okay. So at that point she said, you know, I don't think I want to do the interview. And then I said, well, listen, like, I'm coming. Let's just have lunch. I think it would be really good for us to talk. Like, regardless, if you don't want to do the interview, don't do the interview. And so at that point, we're like,
at least we could have Andrea talk about it later.
Say,
right?
you know, we had this conversation and we met with her and say, like, you know, you don't, but like, I want to meet, like, it's really become important to me to have this conversation. And that was, you know, like, was I trying to get her to agree to the interview? Yes. Was I also, did I mean it? Yes. If sitting down with her and having a face-to-face lunch off record was what was going to happen, then I was willing to fly to Idaho for that too. This was going to be like sort of my one chance to kind of like ask someone these questions. So I really like, I was exactly as invested as I was portraying myself in just like having the conversation, whether I could record it or not.
Well, and I was blown away when I found out that you got Hope on. I mean, when I saw that come up, I thought, what the? I could not wait to listen to that. And it was very captivating to hear what she had to talk about. But Tina, I know that there was a moment in the car where Tina caught audio of Andrea, you being very raw from the whole experience. That was after talking to Hope.
I always would record Andrea in the car and stuff because we just get in these conversations that are really great. So I just hit record, and just, a lot of times she didn't know. Sometimes she knew, but
you're such a creep.
No, totally super creepy.
That's a good producer.
She would be sleeping, and I would be like, "Hey, she's snoring. I should probably get this." No, but like, you know, so I would often record our conversations because they were compelling, and sometimes there's insightful things that can happen. I mean, I remember when we got there, and it was like emotional for both of us because we're like, A, she could not show up, and B, this is a very intense moment for Andrea's life, really, when you think about it. Like this crime, disease, all of the things that Munchausen by proxy is, this horrible act has affected her life. And so this is a really scary and important opportunity for her to have. So there's just a lot of charged emotion in there,
right?
When we were on our way and after the conversation. I will tell you that conversation was very strange for me. Andrea did a great job of holding the space for Hope and really just staying with it. She was brave, and I was snowed in moments. I was like, I think she's going to get help. Oh. I mean, I really was. I was pretty naive about it. I thought, oh, maybe this will, you know, maybe she'll get better or whatever.
Except the help that Andrea was
extending. Yeah. I mean, she showed up pretending that she couldn't hear us. And there's a moment in the episode you will hear that I play tape for her. And She can hear that tape very clearly. But that interview is an important one, I think, for everybody. And I think that what happens, this has always been on my mind, when like true crime or movies and things like that. The crime happens, the perpetrator's caught, they're in jail, story's over. And I'm always like, wait, what happened next? What were they like in prison? What was their life? Who are they now when they're out?
Yeah. And I would argue, Tina, that you were not snowed exactly. I think that was maybe your first experience with someone like Hope.
Yeah.
That was not my first experience with someone like Hope.
Great point. You're totally right. Yeah.
And I also think that we can hold space for a lot of what Hope said to be true in a sense. And I think that even, when she had that reaction to me saying, if you want to get help, et cetera, in that moment, later that day, the next morning, she might have still felt that way. She might still just be in the middle. I mean,
right.
We can't guess it at what really is going on with her. And I think it's worth remembering what Dr. Mary Sanders has told us about folks with this behavior pattern is that there's a tremendous, crushing amount of shame that goes along with it. And so I think, we can. Hope did some really terrible things. That's not under dispute. And I think that whether or not the people who were in her life before want to have any kind of continuing relationship with her, that's very, very tricky. It's very tricky for people to figure out how to have a relationship with a perpetrator. I mean, and that goes for everyone that I've talked to, survivors. I mean, that's something they really struggle with. Can I have a relationship with my mother at all? Can I talk to her once a year? Can I never, what are the parameters that are going to, I'm going to be able to be healthy and have a relationship with this person? So that is just extremely, extremely tricky. But I think for us as listeners and just in sort of a greater context and, in terms of the professionals who look at, is treatment possible? You can still have empathy for her. She is a human being. And that was one of the things that she said is I want people to know that I'm a human being. And that's totally valid. I think and I think that there's a level on which we can say that someone like Hope is in a tremendous amount of pain to do these really destructive things.
Yeah. But
then at the same time, accountability is king in this. And so if they're not willing to be fully accountable, but I don't think Tina, I think the reaction that Tina just had talking about herself in that conversation is the reaction that a lot of people have where they're well, how could you just be fooled by this person? And it's because they're very compelling. And even me, one of the things I felt very self-conscious about that episode because it sounds like I changed my mind about her so quickly and I listening back to it myself, this was totally fascinating for me to listen back to the conversation with her, but also because Tina, is a creep and records me all the time, to listen to what I was saying to Tina. Yeah. Really, it was such a gift. To listen to me talking about it before I go in and talking about it after, because you just don't normally get to hear yourself processing things. And it was really interesting for me to listen to my genuine raw, because of course I felt differently about it 3 days later and a week later. And but in the moment, especially right after, it sounds like I changed my mind about her so quickly because when I'm in the room with her, we are having what is, it was a very sort of warm conversation.
Yeah.
And because I was really trying hard to compartmentalize what I knew about her and just give us the space to be two women having a conversation. And I think that was how I was approaching it. That was genuine. And my openness to Hope was genuine. And then I think once I walked away, some of those things that she said, the smoke sort of started to clear. She is she's an appealing, warm person in real life. It's kind of uncanny. I don't quite know how to she seems like the least threatening person you ever saw in your life.
And I will say that I think it's human nature to want somebody to be redeemed or to be better.
Redeemable,
yeah. And be better. And so when you're sitting in front of somebody that has done very, 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 very diabolical things, to helpless beings. It's really splitting your own mind to have the understanding that they also spent 10 years in prison. So in my mind, I was like, she did her 10 years. She must have gotten stupidly rehabilitated or something in prison, as if our prison system does that, but that's neither here nor there. But I think that it is human nature to want them to be good. And so it's a mind split.
Especially if someone is able to, and I think this gets to like why these cases are so tricky, especially when someone presents like a good person. The reality is, if you're sitting across from a creepy looking guy with neck tattoos, or nothing against the neck tattoo community, like whoever it is that we sort of conceptualize as a criminal, you're sort of like Law and Order central casting criminal. Then you're going to be able to kind of hold that in your mind better. But the reality is, Hope looks like the mom on the block. I mean, she really does. She's looked like that then. She looks like that now. She's soft-spoken. She comes across warm. She was in tears almost the minute she sat down. There is that what made her so compelling then is what makes her so compelling now. And so I think like being able to then recognize that someone can come off this way and still be capable of truly the most monstrous things you can possibly imagine. Yeah, it's a workout for your brain. It really is. Yeah.
And for you both to experience that together, at least you had each other, right? To debrief.
Yes, thank God. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier you're still in contact with a lot of people from the season, and you've built a big community, actually much bigger than what you thought, because you started a support group.
So we have Munchausen Support, which is an online resource site that I started with Dr. Mark Feldman and is also a 501c3. So right now, one of the big things that we're building out is survivor support groups and support groups for family members. So we have a couple that are survivors and a couple that are for dads. That's something I started with my committee colleagues that has sort of gone along with this podcast. And yeah, we're just, that community is growing. And it's one of the other things, other than hearing this unanimously from experts, that's another thing just anecdotally that has made me feel pretty certain that this abuse is not as rare as it's portrayed, because I just keep hearing from too many people that it's happened to them.
So season 2, is there going to be a season 2?
Oh, I hope so.
I hope so.
We recorded some audio from season 2, and we went to Tarrant County again. And the story is very compelling. It's also oddly lovely. There is some really sweet things about the story that I really hope that we get to tell. And some of the characters that you met in season 1 will be in season 2, but it's a brand new story with a brand new set of characters.
The story that we're talking about in season 2, it's the Brittany Phillips case. And it's one that when I heard it, completely disabused me of a whole bunch of notions that I had about what this crime looked like and what perpetrators were like. We're excited to sort of debunk some of even, my assumptions that I went into. And I think there's a lot of really good and interesting people around this case. Sheriff Wayburn and his wife being two of our main characters. And I think I really also, we're looking to sort of shift the focus to talking about survivors. And I think that that's something that has gotten completely lost in the coverage of these cases. Unfortunately, a lot of the media coverage of these cases involves cases where the child dies. And we don't talk about any cases where the child dies. Even in the cases that we talk about that did not go right, the interventions of the professionals who tried to help, we very strongly believe that that's slowed that abuse pattern down and maybe got enough eyes on that child so that they survived. So, and then, we are obviously talking about also some cases where there were criminal charges. So I think, we really want to shift that conversation to, how does life go on after these cases? What I've come to in looking at, again, like I always say, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do this and then I'm done. So we made the first season and then I'm like, okay, that's just a limited series and we're done. And then I was like, no, actually, there's so much more to say. And I think it's a fascinating topic. There's a lot of things to explore. It's really underexplored and the stories are so compelling. And I had not met any survivors until I did the first season of this podcast, and now I've met a bunch, and I'm so inspired by them because this is a type of abuse, and every survivor that I've talked to was not separated from their abuser. So they were raised by that person until they were 18 and left home. And so it's the kind of thing where I think people can sometimes look at these cases and just think like, oh, if that person is not separated from their abuser, like that abuse is so severe that like that person's going to be so messed up that they're sort of like maybe even an inclination to sort of give up on that person and just think like, oh, well, that person's going to have so many challenges. And of course, like, yeah, anybody who grows up with, in a really abusive situation is going to have some challenges. But watching some of these survivors that I've talked to just be determined to sort of turn their lives around and turn their stories around is so incredible, and it's so hopeful. And that's what I really want, is to give people some hope about this issue, to just say like, that it's not, even if the system fails, which honestly I'm pretty convinced it's going to in most cases, especially the ones that don't happen to involve Mike Weber, that there's not, that we don't just sort of give up on the person who's at the center of it.